I still remember the day my world shattered. He looked at me with a coldness I never thought existed and said, "You're not my daughter." Those words, sharp and deliberate, cut deeper than any knife. Then, like a final blow, he tore me from his will, erasing me from his life as if I had never existed. Every ounce of warmth, every memory I thought we shared, vanished in that moment. For days I sat in silence, the betrayal sinking into my bones. I replayed the scene endlessly, every word echoing in my mind. I thought about confronting him, screaming, begging for answers, but that wasn't me anymore. I didn't want to be weak. I wanted him to regret his cruelty in a way that no money could erase. I started small, observing him from the outside, listening to his friends, watching his habits. He was proud, arrogant, and completely blind to the fact that people could see through his arrogance. That was my advantage. Patience became my closest ally. I knew revenge wasn't about anger, it was about precision. I remembered the charity gala he was obsessed with, the one where he loved to flaunt his wealth and make everyone bow to his ego. That was where I would strike. I carefully researched the event, the guest list, the donations, everything. I built a persona, someone respectable, charming, someone he would never suspect. I made connections, donated anonymously, and slowly, he began to trust me. Not just trust me, but admire me. One evening, he invited me to his office. He said, genuinely impressed, "I never expected someone like you to understand the value of legacy." I smiled faintly, letting the words sink in. Inside, I was calm. Calculating every smile, every compliment, every polite gesture was another step toward the moment he would finally see the truth. Weeks passed. I positioned myself as an indispensable ally in his latest business venture. He bragged about my advice to his colleagues, unknowingly praising the very person who would unravel his carefully constructed world. I listened, nodded, offered subtle suggestions, but all the while, I planted the seeds of his downfall. The day came when he finally offered me a gift, a token of reconciliation, though he would never admit it aloud. He handed me a sleek, gold-plated pen. "For someone who has taught me so much," he said, smiling with that smug, self-satisfied expression. I accepted it gracefully, hiding the storm brewing behind my eyes. That pen, he had no idea, was the instrument of his undoing. I had spent weeks ensuring that every document, every contract, every agreement he trusted to his secure office was linked to a meticulous plan. And now, with his own hands, he signed the last piece that would legally transfer his empire to me, under a name he didn't recognize, a company he thought was a mere charity. He leaned back, sipping his drink. "You've done well," he said. "Better than I expected." I smiled coldly because the truth would hit him soon enough. 2 days later, the news broke. The company he built, the empire he flaunted, had been legally transferred. The charity he thought he was donating to, controlled by me. Every asset, every account, every board decision now under my name. And the shock on his face when he realized it, priceless. He came to me, desperation in his eyes, a man who had underestimated the quiet strength of someone he had deemed worthless. "This isn't possible," he shouted. I didn't let him finish. I looked at him, calm and composed, and said, "You called me nothing. Erased me from your life, but I guess you forgot one thing: I wasn't your nothing. I was your nightmare waiting in plain sight." I walked away, leaving him in the wreckage of his own arrogance. The satisfaction wasn't just in the revenge, it was in knowing that I had risen above his cruelty. I had turned pain into power, betrayal into strategy, and rejection into triumph. That night I realized something important. Revenge isn't about making someone suffer, it's about reclaiming your own strength and refusing to be defined by their hate. The lesson: never underestimate the one you try to destroy, because they may just be the storm you didn't see coming. I still remember the day my world shattered. He looked at me with a coldness I never thought existed and said, "You're not my daughter." Those words, sharp and deliberate, cut deeper than any knife. Then, like a final blow, he tore me from his will, erasing me from his life as if I had never existed. Every ounce of warmth, every memory I thought we shared, vanished in that moment. For days, I sat in silence, the betrayal sinking into my bones. I replayed the scene endlessly, every word echoing in my mind. I thought about confronting him, screaming, begging for answers, but that wasn't me anymore. I didn't want to be weak. I wanted him to regret his cruelty in a way that no money could erase. I started small, observing him from the outside, listening to his friends, watching his habits. He was proud, arrogant, and completely blind to the fact that people could see through his ego. That was my advantage. Patience became my closest ally. I knew revenge wasn't about anger, it was about precision. Every move had to be calculated, every step deliberate. I remembered the charity gala he was obsessed with, the one where he loved to flaunt his wealth and make everyone bow to his ego. That was where I would strike. I carefully researched the event, the guest list, the donations, everything. I built a persona, someone respectable, charming, someone he would never suspect. I made connections, donated anonymously, and slowly he began to trust me. Not just trust me, but admire me. One evening, he invited me to his office. He said, genuinely impressed, "I never expected someone like you to understand the value of legacy." I smiled faintly, letting the words sink in. Inside I was calm, calculating. Every smile, every compliment, every polite gesture was another step toward the moment he would finally see the truth. Weeks passed, I positioned myself as an indispensable ally in his latest business venture. He bragged about my advice to his colleagues, unknowingly praising the very person who would unravel his carefully constructed world. I listened, nodded, offered subtle suggestions, but all the while, I planted the seeds of his downfall. The day came when he finally offered me a gift, a token of reconciliation, though he would never admit it aloud. He handed me a sleek, gold-plated pen. "For someone who has taught me so much," he said, smiling with that smug, self-satisfied expression. I accepted it gracefully, hiding the storm brewing behind my eyes. That pen, he had no idea, was the instrument of his undoing. I had spent weeks ensuring that every document, every contract, every agreement he trusted to his secure office was linked to a meticulous plan. And now, with his own hands, he signed the last piece that would legally transfer his empire to me, under a name he didn't recognize, a company he thought was a mere charity. He leaned back, sipping his drink. "You've done well," he said. "Better than I expected." I smiled coldly because the truth would hit him soon enough. 2 days later, the news broke. The company he built, the empire he flaunted, had been legally transferred. The charity he thought he was donating to controlled by me. Every asset, every account, every board decision now under my name. And the shock on his face when he realized it. Priceless. He came to me, desperation in his eyes. A man who had underestimated the quiet strength of someone he had deemed worthless. "This isn't possible," he shouted. I didn't let him finish. I looked at him calm and composed and said, "You called me nothing. Erased me from your life, but I guess you forgot one thing: I wasn't your nothing. I was your nightmare waiting in plain sight." But the revenge didn't stop at the company. I wanted him to feel the weight of every lie, every dismissive word, every moment he had denied me love and respect. I reached out to his closest allies, people he had considered loyal. I subtly revealed the truth about how he had treated me, the way he had betrayed his own blood. Their faces shifted from shock to disbelief to anger. Slowly, the walls he had built around his reputation began to crumble. And he noticed. Oh, he noticed. The isolation that came with his arrogance was crushing him. Friends avoided him at parties, colleagues second-guessed every word. Business partners hesitated before shaking hands. The man who had once laughed at my insignificance now walked through a world where everyone questioned his integrity, his judgment, and his heart. One night, he called me in a frenzy, his voice cracking. Desperation spilling through every syllable. "Please, I didn't mean it. I was wrong. Can we fix this?" I paused, savoring the silence that followed. I could hear the wearing of his mind, the realization slowly dawning that no apology could erase years of cruelty. I whispered softly, "You can't fix what you broke. You can't rewrite history. You made me stronger than you ever imagined." And with that, I hung up, not out of spite alone, but out of power, knowing I had taken control of my destiny. I didn't seek to destroy him completely. I sought justice, balance, and the satisfaction of reclaiming my own life. The lesson I carried in my chest was clear: never let anyone define your worth. Pain can either break you or forge you into someone unrecognizable, someone unstoppable. And betrayal can become the blueprint for your greatest triumph. As I watched from a distance, I realized that revenge wasn't the bitter ending. It was the mirror that reflected my own strength. I had turned tears into strategy, heartbreak into intelligence, and rejection into the ultimate victory. And the moral was undeniable: those who underestimate the quiet, those who dismiss love and loyalty as weakness, will always regret the day they tried to erase someone who refused to be forgotten. More psychological insight into the father's arrogance and the protagonist's patience. Additional twists and emotional tension. More dialogues, suspense, and inner thoughts, perfect for YouTube narration. Here's the continuation. After that day, life changed in ways I had meticulously planned. I wasn't just someone he had to reckon with. I became the invisible hand shaping his every move, the shadow he could not see until it was too late. I started attending his social events regularly, not as his daughter, but as the mysterious philanthropist everyone whispered about. The more he bragged about me, the more the fire of my plan burned quietly inside. "He thinks I owe him something," I thought, smirking to myself. "He thinks I'm grateful. But he doesn't know he's been training me all along, without even realizing it." Each time I watched him, I studied his reactions, his weaknesses. The arrogance that had fueled his success also blinded him. He believed that charm and money could manipulate anyone, that loyalty could be bought. I played along, nodding at his ideas, laughing politely at his jokes, all while weaving the perfect network to execute my final move. Then came the business merger, the one he had been obsessed with for months. He flaunted it like a trophy, telling everyone it would be his legacy. "It's my crowning achievement," he said one evening, swirling his glass of wine. I listened silently as he outlined the deal, detailing every clause, every contract. All the while, I had already ensured that the legal paperwork would redirect the control to me, under a name no one would suspect. The pen he gave me earlier rested in my drawer, innocuous and harmless to anyone else. But to me, it was the key, the symbol of every slight, every insult, every rejection. It was more than metal, it was poetic justice. And finally, the day came when the contracts were signed. When he realized what had happened, his world crumbled in a way he would never forget. The empire he had built with pride, the charity he flaunted as proof of his virtue, Everything was now under my control. The shock on his face was unforgettable. I watched him from across the room, emotionless on the surface, but inside a storm of vindication raged. He tried to bargain, tried to reason.
This can't be real.
This isn't you. We can fix this. His voice trembled, panic spilling over his carefully maintained facade. I looked at him and said softly, deliberately, I've been patient. I've been careful. And now it's too late. But revenge, I realized, was never just about taking what he had. It was about teaching a lesson. I reached out quietly to his closest allies, revealing subtle truths about his cruelty, his manipulations, his tendency to treat people as tools rather than humans. The friends he had relied on began to step away, colleagues second-guessed every decision he made, and even his staff began to lose trust. His reputation, once untouchable, was crumbling. One night he confronted me again, this time with anger flashing in his eyes. Why? Why would you do this to me? He demanded, his voice trembling with rage and disbelief. I met his gaze calmly. Because you taught me how to survive. You taught me that the world doesn't owe me anything. You taught me patience and how to wait for the perfect moment. It was more than revenge, it was a transformation. I had become someone I never thought I could be: strong, strategic, unstoppable. The pain he caused me had been absorbed and turned into power. And now I was untouchable, not because I had money or influence, but because I had mastered the one thing he never could control: over myself and my destiny. I began to implement subtle changes in the company. Under my leadership, it grew beyond anything he had imagined. Employees flourished. Profits soared, and the charity reached levels of impact that would have made him proud if he weren't so blinded by his ego. And the irony, oh the irony, was that the empire he had built for himself now bore my mark, my influence. My vision. He watched helplessly as I expanded, as I innovated, as I became the person he never wanted me to be. Every attempt to undermine me failed because he underestimated me, as he always had. And yet, in that failure, he finally saw what he had lost: not just a business legacy, but a daughter who could have been part of his life had he chosen love over pride. Months later, he reached out one final time. His tone was subdued, almost broken. I see what you've done. You've surpassed me. I didn't respond immediately. I let the silence linger, letting him feel the weight of every insult, every harsh word he had spoken, every moment he had erased me from his life. Then I said simply, it's not about surpassing you. It's about becoming who I was always meant to be. That night I realized the truth about revenge. It isn't about hatred. It isn't about destruction. It's about reclaiming your own life, your own power, and refusing to be defined by someone else's cruelty. It's about turning pain into strategy, betrayal into intelligence, and rejection into triumph. And above all, it's about knowing that sometimes the most satisfying revenge is silent, meticulous, and unstoppable. I watched him one last time, knowing he had learned the hard way that underestimating someone, even their own child, can be the gravest mistake of all. I had taken nothing from him that he couldn't afford, but I had given him a gift far more valuable: the lesson that arrogance and cruelty are never without consequence. In the end, I wasn't just a daughter denied. I was the storm he never saw coming, the quiet force that changed his world, and the proof that strength isn't given, it's forged. And as I moved forward, I carried with me the ultimate victory. The knowledge that I could rise above betrayal, heartbreak, and hatred and emerge stronger, wiser, and unstoppable. Because revenge, when done with patience, intelligence, and heart, isn't about winning over someone else. It's about winning yourself. After the empire had shifted into my hands, I realized that my revenge wasn't complete. Taking the company and the charity was one thing, but true victory required that he feel the weight of every lonely night, every taunting memory, every moment he had ever underestimated me. Revenge, I realized, was not a single act, it was a journey, a story written in patience and subtlety. He began to isolate himself, nervously scanning the room whenever I entered a meeting or a social gathering. Friends who had once laughed at me in childhood now hesitated to include him. Colleagues who had ignored me now whispered my name in awe. The reversal of roles was slow, almost imperceptible at first, but I watched it unfold like a masterful chess game. Every pawn, every move, every reaction was calculated. One evening, I visited him in his study, pretending to seek guidance. I still need your advice on the next project, I said, my tone casual, almost deferential. He beamed, puffing up with pride. Ah, you still respect my experience. Very good. He leaned back in his chair, unaware that every word, every expression, fed the strategy I had spent months perfecting. As we spoke, I noticed the subtle cracks in his confidence, the hesitations, the slight stammer. The way his hands fidgeted, these weren't just cracks, they were my window. I listened, nodded, and smiled politely, all while planting doubts among his closest allies. Every recommendation he made in those meetings was subtly countered, leaving him frustrated and questioning himself. Then came the gala, the event that had once symbolized his power. I attended, not as the overlooked daughter, not as a mysterious philanthropist, but as the woman who had become the center of attention. Guests whispered about my poise, my vision, and my influence. He tried to assert himself, but every attempt to dominate the conversation ended in subtle humiliation. The night unfolded as I had planned, every interaction a carefully timed move on the chessboard of revenge. Weeks later, the final blow arrived. I released an anonymous press report highlighting mismanagement in his previous charity efforts, funds he had proudly displayed as proof of his generosity. The article praised the new leadership, subtly pointing to improvements, efficiency, and ethics all under my direction. The public saw the contrast clearly. The man who had once been admired was now a shadow of incompetence, while the woman he had dismissed as nothing now commanded respect and awe. The calls came. Former partners, colleagues, and friends sought me out for advice. Invitations poured in for collaborations and partnerships. Everywhere I turned, doors opened, opportunities appeared, and recognition flowed. And he watched silently, powerless, as the world shifted beneath his feet. One afternoon he confronted me in private, rage boiling over his carefully maintained composure. "This isn't fair! You can't do this!" I built everything," he shouted. I looked at him calmly, my eyes unwavering. "Fairness. That's not the world we live in. You taught me survival, patience, and strategy. Now you're seeing the results." His face turned pale as the weight of his mistakes settled on him. You've ruined me," he whispered, almost as if admitting defeat. I shook my head gently. "No, I've restored balance. You lost because you underestimated the very person you should have cherished most." I didn't gloat. Revenge, I had learned, was more powerful when silent, when internalized, when measured. Every sigh of frustration, every glance of shock, every sleepless night he endured was my silent victory. It was the power of patience, intellect, and emotional resilience, the kind he had never understood. Months passed. I continued to grow the empire, expand charitable efforts, and solidify my influence. He remained a shadow, a man forced to reflect on his arrogance and cruelty. Occasionally he tried to assert himself, but by now I had anticipated every move. His confidence eroded further, his isolation complete. The final lesson was clear: underestimating anyone, especially someone you have wronged, is a dangerous mistake. The ultimate irony was in the transformation. People admired me not only for my intelligence but for my compassion, for the justice I had executed with grace rather than malice. My revenge wasn't loud or destructive, it was sophisticated, emotional, and utterly effective. I had taken the pain he inflicted and forged it into something far more powerful than anger alone could have achieved. One rainy evening, I visited his home for the last time, a neutral ground to leave him with the final realization. He looked at me with a mixture of fear, awe, and confusion. "I don't understand how did you?" he stammered. I smiled faintly. It wasn't about being cruel. It was about being patient, being clever, and never letting your actions define my worth. I used what you taught me, and now you see the consequences. His silence was deafening. No words, no excuses, no apologies could change the past. I left him there, alone with his thoughts, his regrets, and the stark reflection of his failures. I had not only reclaimed my life but had rewritten the rules of engagement in a world where arrogance often masked weakness. As I walked away, I understood fully what revenge meant: not destruction but transformation. Not hatred but clarity. Not victory over someone else but mastery over oneself. Every scar he had left on me became a weapon of intellect and patience. Every insult became a lesson in strategy. Every act of betrayal became a blueprint for triumph. And so I moved forward, untouchable, unstoppable, and unbroken. I carried with me the ultimate truth: those who dismiss, betray, or underestimate you may wield temporary power, but in the end the quiet, patient, intelligent, and emotionally resilient will always prevail. Revenge isn't about making someone suffer. It's about becoming stronger than they ever imagined you could be. Even after months of strategic victories, I knew the story wasn't over. Revenge isn't complete until the one who wronged you fully realizes the depth of their misjudgment, not just in their mind, but in their heart. I needed one final act, subtle yet devastating, that would etch my triumph in his soul forever. I invited him to a private event under the guise of reconciliation, a charity dinner I was organizing in honor of my father's legacy. Though now, ironically, it was my legacy I was shaping. He arrived, dressed immaculately, radiating the confidence of a man used to power and influence. But when he saw the room, the faces, the respect, the energy, it all froze him. The spotlight of admiration that had once been his alone now circled around me. People who had ignored him now whispered my name, seeking insight, praise, and guidance. He walked beside me, trying to mask his discomfort. "I see you've done well," he muttered, his voice a mixture of pride and disbelief. I smiled softly, guiding him through the crowd, feeling the weight of years of pain and strategy crystallize into this single moment. "We'll all have potential," I said gently, "but it's up to us to see it through." Inside, I could hear his mind racing. He was connecting the dots: the contracts, the corporate takeovers, the press releases, the subtle isolation of his allies. Everything he had built was now under my vision, my control. And yet the true blow wasn't tangible, it was emotional, psychological. The recognition that he had underestimated his own daughter, the very person he had tried to erase from his life. I led him to a private balcony overlooking the city. The night was quiet, the rain washing the streets below, reflecting lights like scattered diamonds. He leaned against the railing, silent, and I felt the tension in his shoulders, the shame, the realization. "Do you understand now?" I asked softly, almost whispering. "All those years you dismissed me, denied me, and tried to erase me, it taught me patience, strategy, and strength. You built your empire thinking I would never matter. But I did. I mattered more than you could ever imagine." His voice cracked. I didn't. I thought I was helping. He faltered, the words failing him. And in that silence, I knew the final piece had taken hold. The arrogance that had blinded him had been replaced with reflection, guilt, and helplessness, the true markers of the lesson I had been planning since the day he called me nothing. I handed him an envelope elegantly simple. "This is your gift," I said. He looked at it, curiosity mingling with fear. Inside were documents, a detailed accounting of all the charitable donations, every business misstep, every mismanaged contract, all the evidence of his mistakes framed with subtle annotations highlighting how I had corrected and improved them. It wasn't destructive, not legally, but it was undeniable. His failures were documented for the world to see. He swallowed hard, realization dawning. You've outdone me." His voice trembled, a mixture of fear, awe, and shame. I nodded, calmly, almost tenderly. "Not outdone, but awakened. You underestimated the quiet, the patient, the resilient. You mistook anger for weakness, denial for defeat. And now you understand." The final twist. I revealed that I had quietly arranged for him to step down from the board, not as punishment, but as a measure of redemption. The press would see it as a voluntary handover, but privately he would feel the weight of defeat and humility. His pride would never recover, yet his life remained intact, a cruel, perfect balance of justice and mercy. He finally looked at me fully, without ego, without pretense. "I am sorry," he whispered, almost broken. I smiled softly. "Apologies aren't what this was about. This was about truth. About balance. About teaching both of us what really matters: respect, patience, and recognizing the value in others, especially those you hold closest." That night, as I walked away, I felt a quiet satisfaction, deeper than any victory or wealth could bring. Revenge had been complete, not through destruction, but through transformation. The man who had dismissed me had seen the consequences of his arrogance. I had reclaimed my life, my power, my dignity, and he had learned, painfully, the lesson he had refused to teach himself. Months later, I reflected on the journey. Every insult, every betrayal, every tear had been a brick in the fortress of strength I had built around myself. I realized that revenge is not about hatred. It's about reclaiming control over your life, proving your worth to yourself, and rising above those who tried to diminish you. He remained in my life, a ghost of his former self, present yet humbled, aware of the power of patience and intelligence over ego. And me, I had become unstoppable, resilient, and unapologetically strong. I had learned the ultimate truth: the quiet, patient, and clever always triumph over arrogance, cruelty, and ignorance. The final moral was clear: revenge is most powerful when it transforms you, when it reclaims what was stolen, and when it teaches lessons without cruelty, only precision. I had turned every wound into a weapon, every insult into insight, and every rejection into a plan for victory. And in doing so, I had not just won over him, but I had conquered the shadow of my own pain. Because in the end, revenge is not about making someone suffer. It's about becoming someone they cannot ignore, someone they cannot defeat, someone who rises stronger, wiser, and unstoppable from the ashes of betrayal. As the city lights shimmered below me that night, I whispered to myself, a quiet promise echoing in the rain. I am no longer defined by the pain of the past. I am defined by the power I forged from it. And no one, not even him, will ever take that from me again. The storm had passed. The empire was mine. The lesson had been learned. And I was free.